Assalamualaikum and hello everyone. Welcome to the video on how to write down the lab report for experiment 1 DK014. Okay, for the soft copy or the PDF version, it is available on the Google Drive, which is accessible through your description of WhatsApp group. Without further ado, let's look first on how to write the lab report in general. You could refer this on the lab manual on page 5. So here it mentioned about post-lab session. After the experiment, we have post-lab session where we will explain what has been carried out and discuss the findings of the experiment. And number 2, introduce the format of the report writing as below. So how to write the lab report, we will follow this format. Okay, so first what you need to have is actually title, where we're going to write the title of the experiment. So specifically for this experiment, it's actually we're going to do experiment 1. Experiment 1 is the determination of the density of water. So in the title, we have to write down all of this. So this is the title for the lab report. Next is to write down the objective. Okay, so for the objective, here it mentions state clearly the objective. Example given, first one is to determine the density of water. When we refer to experiment 1 objective, here it mentioned at the end of the lesson, students should be able to determine the density of water and compare the accuracy of the density of water using different apparatus. But this time around, you don't have to write down this at the end of the lesson. Students should be able to. You don't have to write this one. Okay, we're just going to summarize it. Number 1, to determine the density of water. Number 2, to compare the accuracy of density of water using different apparatus. So how we're going to write it down? So this is how you write down the objective. Okay, so you can pause this part if you want to write it down. So once you have written down the objective, next is you should write down the introduction, where we will write the theory or background of the experiment, include equation and formula. Introduction is the theory or background of the experiment. So what you should do is actually for the introduction, you're just going to write down all of this into your lab report. You could pause this part of video, or again, you can refer to the soft copy of the lab manual itself. Next, you should write down the apparatus and reagent, where you have to list all apparatus and reagents used. For experiment 1, okay, what you have here is apparatus, okay, because reagent used is actually only the distilled water. Okay, so for the apparatus, you could write down all of this. Okay, you could write down in terms of list like this, or you could also write it down in a paragraph like this. Okay, but then make sure that you must write down all the apparatus used from the sticker label until the 120 ml measuring cylinder. Next, you need to write down the procedure. Okay, for the procedure, it must be written in past tense sentences about all the steps taken during the experiment. Okay, so why do we need to write down in past tense? Because usually, the lab report is done after you have done the experiment itself lah. So it means that all the experiment is actually in the past. So that's why you have to make sure it is in past tense. Okay, example here, measure 10 ml of water by using burette and transfer it to a beaker. So again, we cannot start with by was measured. So what is actually being measured? So again, that's why we use 10 ml of water was measured by using burette. Okay, so this part. And then transfer it to beaker. Here we have to change it into a past tense as well. Okay, so here using transferred it to a beaker, or it was transferred to a beaker. Again, and then next is actually we have to write all the steps completely. For experiment 1, the procedure is divided into 3. We have part A, measuring cylinder, part B, and part C. Okay, so in this video, we will do the part A together, part B and C. You should try yourself. Okay, again, for the procedure, we cannot just copy-paste from the words in the lab manual. We have to change it into past tense. Okay, so here number 1, rinse all the glass apparatus with distilled water. So rinse here, we cannot just start with was rinsed or were rinsed. So what are the things that are being rinsed? So here we can see that all the glass apparatus. So we should start with all the glass apparatus. Since we're talking about all, so it means more than one. All the glass apparatus were rinsed. Make sure were rinsed. And this is past tense with distilled water. Okay, so make sure in the lab manual or in your lab report, you have to make sure it is in past tense. So this one. So okay. So that is for number 1. Okay, number 2. Label A to a clean and dry beaker with sticker label. So here, we just cannot start with was label. So what is being labeled? It's actually a clean and dry beaker was labeled A with sticker label. So that is step number 2. Next, we're going to look at step number 3. Step number 3, weigh the beaker A on the analytical balance. So we cannot just start with was weigh. So what is being weighed is actually beaker A. Okay, so beaker A was weighed on the analytical balance. Okay, so first we're going to write this one down first. The second part for number 3 is to record the mass of the empty beaker in 3 decimal places. So we just cannot start with was recorded the mass. So we will write down the mass of the beaker, the empty beaker was recorded. Again, was recorded in 3 decimal places. So that is for the steps number 3. Okay, so when you refer back to the lab manual, number 3 here in the bracket, make sure to use the same beaker and analytical balance for weighing before and after addition of water. This one you don't have to include in the procedure lah. Okay. So next is actually, step number 4. Measure 10 ml of water by using measuring cylinder and transfer it to beaker A. So we have to change it again into past tense. So this is step number 4. Okay. Next is step number 5, weigh and record the mass of the beaker and water in table 1. So here you mentioned have to in table 1. So again, we have to make sure in past tense. So it will be the mass of beaker and water was weighed and recorded in table 1. Okay, and then next step and the last step for part A, number 6, calculate the density of water. So we will write down the density of water was calculated. So this is how you write down the procedure in your lab report. Again, you have to make sure all of it is in past tense. So I have written down the part A, part B and C. You could write yourself, which is part B is burette and part C is pipette. After you have written down all the procedure, then we will proceed with result or observation. So the result and observation is the data tabulation with units and uncertainties. Make sure we have the unit lah. Okay, and then we have that data processing where it could be plotting graph, calculation, okay, to obtain the result of the experiment. Okay, so for experiment 1 itself, during week 1, we have done the experiment and then you have calculated the value. Okay, so right now what we're going to do is actually we're going to rewrite all of this again in our lab report. When writing down the result, make sure that you include the unit. So for the temperature, the pressure and the volume must include the unit. But then the value in the table here, we don't write down the unit in each of the column. Why? Because actually on the left hand side here we can see that mass of empty beaker in bracket gram. The same goes for mass of beaker plus water gram. Mass of water transfer is gram. Since here we have written down the unit of gram, it is understood that each of the table here we have the unit to be in gram. But then if you write down pun, there's no problem. Okay, but then again it is not compulsory for you to write it down because we have written down here. Okay, so this is actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, this 12 value is actually the one that you got when you have done the experiment. Okay, but then the density of water you have to calculate by yourself. Okay, so again in the introduction, it has mentioned that density is the mass over volume. So we have to show the calculation for the burette, for the pipette and the measuring cylinder. Okay, to calculate the density of water when we're using each of the apparatus. So before showing the calculation, first thing first, I'm going to again write down the formula. Okay, and then here I have divided into 3. We have part A, measuring cylinder, part B, burette, and part C, pipette. So we have to substitute all the values into each part of the calculation. Okay, so for example, measuring cylinder, okay, density is the unknown. Mass is actually, for measuring cylinder is here, 9.643. Okay, the volume of water is 10 ml. Okay, and then you will get the value of the density. Okay, then from here, we can substitute into this table. Okay, so that is for measuring cylinder. For the case of burette, okay, the mass will be different. Okay, so for the burette, here we can see that the mass of water is 9.975. Since the mass is different from the measuring cylinder, so it means that the density will be different as well. So here is the value. Okay, so when you calculate the density, you have to write down the unit as well. Okay, but then in the table, you don't have to write down the unit because here we have written down the unit on the left hand side. Okay, so the same goes for pipette. For the pipette, mass is actually, we took it from here. So this will be the result for your lab report. After you have done the result, next is the discussion part. So for the discussion, we will give comment about the experimental result by comparing with the standard value. So we have 3 values and then we have to compare with the standard value. So standard value, density of water is 1 gram per ml. Okay, so we're going to compare it lah. Okay, so for number 2, state the source of mistake or error and any precaution. As well, the answer all the question given here, we will discuss for the lab report experiment 2 and 3. Okay, so how do we discuss for the experiment 1? So for the discussion, so first we have to write down because we're going to compare with the theoretical value. So we write down here the theoretical value or density of water is 1 gram per mil. Okay, so it's either you write down gram stroke ml or you could also write down gram ml to the power of -1. It is the same. Okay, so from the experiment, the value of density of water by using burette is what? The density of water by using pipette is what? And density of water by using measuring cylinder is what? Okay, again, all these values is actually you have calculated during the calculation part, which is this one. Okay, so make sure you substitute with the correct one. So for example, by using burette is this one. Okay, and make sure to include the unit as well. Okay, so that is discussion number 1. Okay, number 2, the most accurate and precise apparatus to measure the density of water is, again, it depends on your result. Which of those 3 is the nearest to the value of 1? So that one will be the most accurate and precise apparatus. So based on the result here, we can see that the most precise and accurate is burette. But for this is for the data that I have shown to you here. But again, please refer to your own result, okay, to write down the most accurate and precise apparatus. The last part is the conclusion. So for conclusion, you have to state briefly the result with reference to the objective of the experiment. Each experiment has its own specific objective, so you have to answer it back. Okay, you just cannot say the objective is achieved. No, we have to answer specifically. So what does it mean? For experiment 1, objective number 1 is to determine the density of water. So we cannot write down the density of water is achieved. We cannot state it like that. We have to be very specific with the objective itself. So how do we answer to determine the density of water? So you write down the density of water by using burette is the values. Again, make sure to include the unit. By using pipette is the value and the unit. And by using measuring cylinder is the values and the unit itself. So this is what it meant by answering the objective. Reference back to the objective itself. Okay, so again, all this value is the same from your part of discussion, which you get from the calculation. So that is the first objective which we have answered. The second objective is to compare the accuracy of the density of water using different apparatus. Then we have to answer the most accurate apparatus to measure the density of water is which apparatus. Again, all of this is based on your own result. So that's the end of the lab report. Again, if you're a bit unsure of which part, you can pause it and you can also refer to the soft copy available on your Google Drive. So thank you, and that's it for this video.